because we're with ACT and about autism, I have a couple little stories to share, just along the way, so people kind of understand where we've come from, because I think we have come a ways from where we were years ago. I remember when I first started this position, and I started in August 2003. And in 2004, 2005, I was fortunate enough to be invited to a gathering, and the subject was autism, and it might have been actually Linda Reed who invited us to some kind of a group. I can't remember exactly that, but I remember talking to a female physician who did assessments, screening or an assessments diagnosis for autism. And it was so long ago, I don't remember her name, but it doesn't matter anyway. What matters is when we were talking, and she was talking to me as a provincial advisor, she says they don't have autism in First Nations communities. I've never diagnosed an Indigenous child with autism. And she puzzled me because I kind of went, no, we have autism. And she goes, oh, I've been doing this for so many years, and I've never diagnosed a child with autism. Well, I know families of children with autism in my community and in other communities. I've met other communities through my work through AIDP, visiting AIDP programs, who have children that maybe were suspected but not diagnosed, or they were diagnosed with FASD. That was a wonderful diagnosis for Indigenous children a couple decades ago, particularly, or OCD or ODD, everything but autism. But then when I was talking to parents of children with autism, they weren't diagnosed till they were 8 or 10 or 12 or 16 or 22 or 40. So for that physician to say there was no autism, it's just because in her world, she had never seen a child being diagnosed with autism. But forgetting that as they became youth or adults, even into their 40s, they weren't diagnosed with it. So we have had it. We just had not been diagnosed the right way. And secondly, I think because of AIDP, because of ASCD, because of Aboriginal Head Start programs, and many other Aboriginal early years programs and services, we are having children diagnosed very early now. So it didn't just happen in our communities. It just was never diagnosed before. They're getting diagnosed as young as 2 years old now. And I just talked to an ASCD consultant last week whose young boy on her caseload is 8. So he's had 6 years of supports now because of that early diagnosis. So again, I'm giving acknowledgement to the programs that are working with our young children and families, but also giving credit and honoring the families, because I hear families so often say, we knew something was wrong. We knew he was different. We knew he wasn't doing, we knew, but nobody was listening. So part of what we're hoping we've done with this research is to empower our programs even more, to support parents even more so that they can advocate for their child and be strong about it. And I really hope that's one of the things that we're doing. And I just want to share a story that just happened what's today? Friday? It might have, was our meeting on Wednesday? Monday, I was on the ferry coming over here because it was so foggy that Harbour Air wasn't flying. So I had to run to the ferry terminal and hop on the ferry to get here in time for my meeting at Women's Hospital. And this young man, I'm going to guess he's between 28 and 35. I'm sitting there on the ferry reading, and there was a shadow all of a sudden. And I looked up and he goes, "Do you mind if I say something?" I said, "No." He goes, "I think you're very pretty, and I love your red shoes." And I just said, "Oh, thank you so much." He goes, "You're welcome." And then a couple steps later, the father came, said, "I'm sorry about that. I hope he didn't disturb you. He has autism." And I'm kind of going, why is he apologizing? He came and gave me a compliment on my red shoes. He didn't disturb me. He didn't offend me. But that just made me think, if he's apologizing for that, how I just still feel here for the parents who have children on the spectrum or any other disability, and going, you don't have to follow your child around and apologize for them. I was taken aback, so I didn't say anything. I just kind of sat there and I just thought, oh, wow, that father thought he had to say something when all his son did was, he probably only thought I was pretty because of my red shoes, not because I was pretty. But that just happened this week. And I was thinking, wow, that's one dad. So just think of all of the parents who just feel like they have to just explain, and parents don't. And I just really felt, and I just thought he was just a wonderful young man, and he didn't offend me. So we're hoping that as part of our work, again, whether it's autism or something else, that parents love their kids, they're proud of their kids, and they don't have to second guess them or apologize for them to anybody. So I'm hoping that.
Do you want to, what I wanted to just add to make the linkages between the work that we did and what we're here for today is so basically what the findings, the way that the framing that I did, that I then brought back to AIDP and to families and said, okay, this is what I'm doing. Is this okay? Blah, blah, blah. Evolved from there. Is that I actually drew on this idea of relational accountability that Sean Wilson had raised in his research, because that's what I was seeing that was happening in the programs, is that AIDP workers were relationally accountable to their families and not to their job descriptions and not to what they were being told or thought from whatever reasons that they should be doing. They were doing what a parent or a family identified was important for them. And they were responding to that, regardless of whether it fit in with what they thought they should be doing, right? And so it was things like going with a parent to the emergency department because a parent was really reluctant to go to emergency department without their AIDP worker with them. Or it was the AIDP worker having to learn about the legal system because they were so often being asked by parents to go with them to navigate the child welfare system. Okay. Or it was going with a parent on the bus to the grocery store to help them manage the child in the stroller and the groceries, and they would go shopping together. So it was all these things that were, and what I frame it now as being in the gray zone, right? And what was interesting for me as an OT is that I then looked at this and thought, okay, so this is actually this socially responsive, broader approach that moves beyond, that attends to the impact of these social determinants that are rooted in our colonial ways of doing things in Canada. This is what we need to be looking at in early intervention. Okay. And so I took some of the findings and shared them with early intervention therapy colleagues. And it was really interesting because I said, okay, this is from this program. These things, I think, are innately aligned with the principles of cultural safety. I think these are some of the things that we need to be thinking about as early intervention therapists. And some of the response back was, yes, but. And the big but, which is really informing what I'm trying to do now, is, well, that sounds great, but we can't do that because we have these policies. We have to do this because of accreditation. We have long wait lists. We don't have the time to do that. We can't have cups of tea. We've got to do blah, blah, blah. We have to do assessments. We can't defer assessments. We have to do them. We have to write reports in this way. So they were kind of really, that was the first time that I was really, and this was back in 2015, that I started thinking about, okay, and we had a long conversation this morning about systems change. And that if we're expecting to change the way that we support families that have children with autism on the front line, then we cannot expect frontline providers, whoever they are, to do that work on their own unless their organization, their manager, and all those things around that shape the way we are and what we do is also in alignment as well. So that actually involves changing the systems, not slapping on the window dressing and calling it something different. It's a fundamental change of the system that we have. And that's tough.
Mm-hmm.
That's really tough to do. And that's the kind of work that not only myself, but others I think are involved in doing now more.
Mm-hmm.
And the big system, you want to talk about child welfare system and the findings?
Oh, you can.
Yeah?
Yeah, you did that.
So two things. When I said to Diana, okay, if I find something when I do this study that isn't very positive about your program, what do I do with that? And she goes, well, we need to know. We need to know. Okay. It wasn't actually, but there was something that was surprising and totally unexpected. Is in our early conversations, Diana, she would say two things to me all the time. Alison, we're a family-centered program. And I'm like, yeah, I know that. But family-centeredness in the literature is all based on white middle-class families.
Yeah.
And so, what does that mean? So that was that's my one trigger word still. I get a bit shaky when people say family-centered because I'm like, yeah, okay. But the other thing Diana said was, we're a voluntary program. We're voluntary. I'm like, okay. So, but during the study, what came up was talking to AIDP programs around the province is, guess what? Many of the programs have families, have parents, have mothers who have been told, you want to keep your children, you want to get your children back, you go to AIDP. And so some programs were 80%. We did a bit of we did sort of an ad hoc little survey. I'm like, this is coming up again and again. The programs were being occupied by mothers predominantly who had been told, you've got to go to AIDP. This is a condition, right? And so I started looking at this and saying, Diana, look, I know you want the program to be voluntary, but this isn't looking voluntary to me. Mm-hmm. And I was at a conference where I had the opportunity to talk to a social worker who was doing a lot of work nationally around Jordan's principle at that time. And I said to her, can I talk to you? I don't have a social work background. I don't want to talk to you about these findings that's coming up in this study. And I said, it looks to me like AIDP are being co-opted by the child welfare system. She goes, well, that's a really interesting word. Why are you saying that? And I explained why. And she said, just be careful, because she said, sounds to me like AIDP is a really great program. And social workers, by referring families to that program, you could say are doing their job. And so do you want them to stop referring families to this great program in order to get their kids back or to prevent them from losing their kids? And she goes, you've got to be careful. This is more, again, of a structural inequity, a structural problem. And so we wrote, and so I really wanted to really get this message out there. And you can pick it up there.
Okay, and we can have these papers downloaded for everybody to see. But just talking about them a little bit, the original research project was done in 2015. And so what we learned from that was definitely helpful for our programs, in that they all got the copies first. Then we shared them with the ministry. Then we shared them with anybody who would ask them. And I believe it's on my website, but our website was recently updated and some stuff wasn't moved over. So, but I'm pretty sure this is on our website, but it'll also be downloaded on through ACT, and you'll all have a copy. So from 2015, it's so true. What Alison said about, yes, we are family-centered practice and child-focused, but family-centered practice. But yes, every single one of our programs said they're mandated to come. So that does take away the voluntary nature of it. But we still say, if they say no, I don't want anybody forced to come, because they come here and then they go like this. They're really not there, even though they're there. So we've really worked hard to work through that. And yes, one of our AIDP reported that 80% of the children on their caseload were children in care, had extra support needs, had multiple needs. And so one of the things AIDP does is remain connected with birth families. We have to work with the foster families, but we're going to work with the birth families no matter what. If they have to have supervised visits, some of our programs will do it and some of them choose not to because they don't want to be seen as the police or the monitors for the ministry, but some of them will because that's when they can do the home visits with the birth parents. So what we've done is really, I think, improved our support for the birth parents through this research, but also advocating for parents because a lot of time poverty is a form of neglect. So they're being removed for poverty. They're not being removed for any other reason. So working with the families as best we can and helping keep families together is our goal. But our goal is also to work with social workers to have them refer them to our programs before they're removed. And working on that angle the best we can, like informing the social workers. We're here to support, we're here to empower, we're here to advocate, we're here to do all of those things until they can do it for themselves. And that program, they reported 80% of their children were children in care when they got their the Navigating Structural Violence with Indigenous Families, the Contested Terrain of Early Childhood Intervention and Child Welfare System in Canada. This one came out of our 2015 report. And prioritizing relationships and relational practices with families experiencing marginalization. That AIDP worker who had 80% of children on their caseload, she takes these everywhere with her she goes, all three of them, but particularly these two. When she's talking to her contract manager through the ministry, her director of operation, anybody who will listen, she brings this with them, puts it on the table and says, we got to do things different. It's not working. So let's do things different. It's given AIDP programs the voice that they need to speak louder for the families they're working with. And that particular program has reduced children in care by 20% in 2 years because she's got a tool now. She's got ammunition, whatever we want to call it. She takes it wherever she goes. It's quite amazing. She doesn't do this. She does this and literally shares this wherever she can. And she does it a lot. And she's very, very happy now that there's a better working relationship with their social or child welfare social workers, in that they're working together before instead of making us work together after. So now we're not having relationships with foster families and birth families. It's reducing some of our workload because now we're working with the families before they're removed. And if they still have to be removed, we still have that relationship with the birth family. So we're really happy because we finally took on this research years after we should have, but we had to be ready. So I think the other message I want to give when we're talking about research is time. I think it has to be community paced. It has to be community driven. It has to come from the community. So the community might be the program, the community might be the health program, it might be chief and council, it could be anybody, but it has to be paced and driven by the First Nations or Indigenous people. And that's what I felt like we had. I felt like it was led by us, even though the researcher was Alison. So I guess in some closing comments, please review these. A lot of interesting stuff has come out of these 3 pieces of paper. There's somebody doing some research now that read these papers that wants to be connected to us now and have us connected to their research. We've had some of the ministry folks have reviewed it and appreciated it, and it helps them with contract negotiations when we're trying to show people that we're different. We're just not IDP with an A, we're AIDP. And some of our programs have chosen to call themselves Indigenous Infant Development Programs. Some of them are still saying Aboriginal. Some of them have just changed to what they need to be. Our Prince George AIDP is actually AIFDP, because it is about family development as well as infant and child development. So we have been allowed to be who we need to be for families. Yeah, we're kind of looked down a little bit. Somebody worries about our credentials and our skills because we're being compared to the mainstream world. But many of us come with a background in ECE or ECD, and many of us are getting our academic knowledge while we're working at the same time. So we're trying to meet the needs of sort of the academic or the book knowledge, but also trying to keep that traditional teachings and practices in place. So we have all of these programs across BC, but they might all have the same framework. They might all have the same starting point, but they're what they need to be in their nation. And I always talk about assessment with our communities, because standardized assessment tools aren't very Indigenous, but we can make them Indigenous by the tools that we use. So I always carry around my drum and a little war canoe that my dad carved, a baby in a cradle board that my mom made, just everything. And we just make our program Indigenous. So I don't want to end on a negative note, but I want to say that being compared to our mainstream colleagues has always been an issue, but we're still here. So that's ending on a positive note. We're still here, and we still are what we need to be for our Indigenous families. And yes, we have more children diagnosed on the spectrum than we have ever had before, and we're just happy that we have Indigenous programs to support them. And we really still need to work with our mainstream colleagues and programs and agencies where we don't have AIDP or ASCD, and hopefully have a relationship where you can come to us for guidance and support if you have families on your caseloads.